Okay. I hope this is not the summit of my poetic experience, since that means it's downhill from here on in. Uh,
Yeah, that's true.
actually, the way the question was originally put to me was that, what's it like being both a poet and an editor? And,
Yeah. Okay.
yeah, and sometimes, that it feels like you're stuck, like being stuck between the chicken and the egg almost, and bouncing back and forth in a decision-making process. But I guess what we need to get through our heads is that both editing and writing and poetry are they serve a creative purposes, and one shouldn't be subordinated to the other, subverted by the other. But I do feel, however, that in order to edit poetry, it does help to be a poet. It's important. I think quite often when editing someone's poetry, grasping the poet's intentions and voice is more important. And as we've talked about this already, both the others that talked about this, is more important, or at least more significant, than making sure the grammar and logic are correct, right? So I think a poet's voice or the vision is or should be inviolate. And there should be a big flashing sign, poetic voice at work, do not disturb. But, as an editor, I do have some quirks and some bête noire. And among them, I'm not fond of loose poetic language, overly abstract and or generic words and phrases, cliches and stereotypes, hallmark poetry, as I call it. So like a thin veneer of faux emotions and empty of any depth. So I like and look for tight writing and sharp language, startling images. But this comes across more in my decisions when it comes to evaluating poetry collections than the actual editing process itself, at least for me, because the culling sees to that. So with my own poetry collections, I've been very fortunate in my editors, as to where all three, Antonio D'Alfonso for Light and Time, the late George Pirlet for The House on 14th Avenue, and Bruce for At the End of the World, have respected my voice. And so for that, I am forever grateful. And also very thankful for the way that they've restructured, in some cases, the collections to make them tighter. At the End of the World was originally the collection was had to do with caves, basically, and bringing bones from one cave to another cave, and Bruce took that and he understood that quite clearly from the beginning. So it was basically a matter of putting the poems in a right order, as Bruce did, and so come up with this book that I think is good, and I thank Bruce for doing that for me.
Well, thank you. Michael, would you read one of the poems from your collection?
Sure. Yeah, and I did mention that a lot of the poems are about caves, physical caves or psychic caves, depending. And so this one is called a visit to an ice cave. Imagine then a line of ancestors embedded in ice, their startled faces trapped in the moment deep freeze takes hold and time stops. Caught within this unlikely cave, a gelid force field to keep the warmth at bay, do they stare out at the passage of clouds, breezes bringing honey and goldenrods, a sun that seems well within reach? Can they yearn for such a touch? All it would take to get the clock ticking again is for one ray to find its way inside, one drip of water from a stalactite's tip. Imagine then a line of ancestors emerging through ice, a sudden release from stasis, inevitable rebirth, the shudder of a thaw into worlds without pause, where motion is constant and the engine burns and belches, unable to stop from devouring itself, where clouds are manufactured for the sole purpose of enticing those within to expose themselves, where sun, honey, and goldenrods extract the passing moment from forever and hold it out for the expiring to mourn. Best then to imagine the perfection of an empty space, a place of blinding darkness, hollowed out by winds so ghostly they deflect the sunlight itself, a place that seals the ancestors in and makes them immune to life, a place with neither inside nor out, a place that can't be imagined. Imagine then what can't be imagined.
Very nice. Thank you very much, Michael. It's a wonderful book, and it's the kind of book that you read a poem of yours, and it does make you ponder, it does make you think, and it really just spurs the imagination. Thank you for sharing that, and we're going to have you read a few more at the end of this session. Now, Bruce, you were involved just a few months ago in the process of having your own work edited by an editorial collective of interns at Black Moss. And we've spoken about this, and we spent more than 7 months actually going over the whole process of editing, and then seeing how the book came to life in the hands of these young interns. What was that experience like for you to work with them?
I think I approached it with I was curious as to what they would make of it. I know with Michael's book, it starts off with spelunking and it turns into an acousis, which turns into these harrowings of hell and so forth. And you can see where the book was going. I had really no idea where the chunk of manuscript for Grace of Falling Stars was going to go. I think I gave them about 180 pages of poems. Yeah. And the original title that I had for it as a kind of working title was Postcards from Heaven. But that didn't seem to work because, so I had no idea what they were going to come up with. I think the greatest fear that I had going in was the idea that I might end up with a camel, which is a horse designed by a committee. Or the other sort of way of thinking about it is the John McGraw school of editing. Everybody line up alphabetically according to height, where you're not quite sure how everything's going to come together. And they were very perceptive. I think that especially with the students I had the closest contact with, Abby Coutinho, for example, and Brienne and so forth, we talked. And I think just the conversation is very, very important because they suddenly one day came up with this idea. I'd given them a riddle to solve, and I don't think I should have done that in retrospect. But the riddle was, where is there no time? And they tore their brains apart. And of course, the answer is heaven. There's no time. And Eden is no time. And I said, well, what are the things you find in both Eden and heaven? And they said, well, happiness, joy. And then they went, that's great. That's what we'll run with. And it became the organizing principle for the book. And I think what they learned was that behind every book, there has to be some sort of almost like roadmap or some sort of key to the whole thing that allows the poems to speak on their own. So I was quite pleased by it because they not only saw something, they saw beyond the something that I anticipated. And I was grateful to them for what they chose. It was one point where it turned into a bit of a poker game because they said, well, we want this poem. And I said, well, what about this poem? I said, well, we'll trade you this poem for that poem for considerations. And it was
pretty funny.
The June draft at the NHL, sort of a lot of poems are changing hands and so forth. But I was very happy with the end, with the net result, because it's a solid book. I mean, just watching them do it, and I had the pleasure of watching them discover their way through a work, and rather than trying to sort of put a square peg in a round hole, they allowed the poems to speak to them, and that's the most important thing I think young editors can pick up on, that you don't come into the text with a preconceived notion. You let the poems help you discover what the poems are going to do. So.
Great, that's so true. And it's ironic that one of the very first poems in the book, it's the second poem in the book, actually, called No Hands. And it was a poem I was thinking that maybe you thought it might go into another collection altogether. It was on your list of poems that should be cut, from this book. But
I didn't like it. I thought, sort of thing. I think I was too blinded by my own cleverness, and that's something a good editor sees through.
Yeah.
They spotted that, and they said, no, this is great, and this is kind of like this is the key poem to the book because it's going to unlock all the others. So,
and I certainly thought it was one of the key poems in the book. It's one of my favorites. So Bruce, I'm going to ask you, what we're going to do is we're going to turn to something else. We're going to have you read 3 poems, and then we're going to follow that with Michael, and we'll finish with Antonia. So,
okay.
So Bruce, would you mind reading No Hands?
This is the one I have up on deck first. So, anyways,
all right.
This is No Hands. As soon as the training wheels came off, having learned to balance on 2 thin tires, my friends taught me the art of flying, closing my eyes, letting go of handlebars, feeling the wind against my face. Down long-hilled streets, pedaling up again, how a tilt of the head or shift in weight could negotiate a broad suburban curve. If I spread my arms and closed my eyes, I thought I'd catch tomorrow in the rush. So knowing how to ride a bike is an art one never loses, yet feels when it is gone. Part of the body, like a language one speaks, and why birds spread their wings to catch the feeling of forever before they fall to earth.